Throughout the course of our lifetimes, almost all of us are going to pull a muscle at some point. But if you don't know how to rehabilitate a pulled muscle, it's going to cause you a lot more trouble than it needs to. In today's video, I'm going to show you 6 simple steps to rehabilitate a pulled muscle so it doesn't give you grief later in life. Hi everybody, my name is Will Harlow and I'm the Over-Fifties specialist physio here at HT Physio in Farnham, and today I'm going to be running you through a 6-step plan to rehabilitate your body after a pulled muscle. Now, before we dive into the content of today's video, if you haven't already, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel using the buttons below, because you'll be the first to hear about our new videos when they're released. Now that that's been said, let's talk about pulled muscles. Now, a pulled muscle, a strained muscle, or a torn muscle are all the same thing, just with different terms to describe them. So what we mean by a pulled muscle is basically a muscle that lines up like this and its fibers has been torn or pulled, and some of the fibers are pulled apart. So in an injury like that, it often happens with like a really big contraction, or you try to pick something up from the floor and you pulled a muscle in your back, or you try to lift something from the floor and you pulled a muscle in your shoulder or in your neck, or you try to lift a weight and you pulled a muscle in your arm. All of these things can happen. They can also happen during sports. So if you're running and you pull your hamstring or you pull your calf, all of these muscle injuries are very, very common. And basically what happens when you pull a muscle is you've asked the muscle to contract too hard, the fibers have pulled apart, you're going to end up with some bleeding inside the muscle, you're going to end up with pain, you're going to end up probably with bruising if it's a bad pull, and you might also end up with weakness and stiffness in the surrounding areas. Now, rehabilitating this kind of an injury goes a lot further than just resting it until it feels better. Because if all we do is rest a muscle after we've pulled it, yes, eventually the pain will go away and it will start to feel better, but the muscle will remain weak, it will remain tight, and it will be at risk of further injuries. Now, if you have a pulled muscle that's not rehabilitated properly, later on down the line, the other muscles around it are going to have to do more work than they're designed to do. Then you get muscles becoming tight and unhappy and painful. And then you can end up with a whole host of problems that just cascades as life goes on. Now, I don't want you to end up in this position. So today we're going to be talking about the 6 steps to prevent that from happening. Let's talk about the steps now. So step number 1 is what you do straight away after you've pulled the muscle. And what we're talking about here is the first 3 days following the injury. So the first thing you're going to do after you notice a muscle pull is you're going to start off by resting for 3 days. Now, if you're playing sport and you notice that you've pulled a muscle, that means you have to stop immediately. And the reason we tell people to stop straight away after pulling a muscle is because if you keep contracting that muscle, the tear is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you keep trying to play, you can't run off a muscle strain. A muscle strain will run you off instead. So you must stop playing if you notice a pull. This goes the same thing for gardening, or if you're out walking and you notice you've pulled something, or if you're doing housework and you notice you've pulled your back or your arm or your neck or anything, you must stop and rest if you don't want it to get worse. Now, along with that, what we need to do is we need to try and apply ice to the injured muscle. Now, the reason we apply ice to the muscle after it's been pulled is because, as I said before, when you pull a muscle, you end up with bleeding inside the muscle. You might not notice this is happening, because it's not like when you cut yourself and there's blood. It's going on underneath the skin, deep within the muscle. The biggest clue you might get is a bit of bruising, but that doesn't happen for everyone. So even if you can't see any obvious signs of bleeding, it's still worth trying to reduce that bleeding by applying ice to the injured area. If the area that you've injured is in your leg, you might also find that elevating it, so sticking it up on a chair or on a stool, will also help to stem the bleeding and help it to get better. So that's the first 3 days and the first step ticked off. So after the first 3 days, what do we do next? Let's talk about step number 2. So step number 2 in fixing a muscle strain is to improve the range of motion around the joint. Now, after you've pulled a muscle, what you'll tend to get is stiffness in the surrounding joints. And the reason that happens is because as soon as we pull a muscle, the body tries to lock everything up around that area to protect it. Now, we will have noticed that if you've pulled your calf or if you've pulled your thigh, the next day you're going to feel that it's very stiff to move your knee or to move your ankle. And the reason for that is, as I've said, the body's trying to protect the area. It doesn't want you to use that muscle, so everything around it, all the surrounding muscles, will tighten up to try and prevent you from moving it. Not to mention the injured muscle itself will start to feel very tight as well. So after 3 days, that process doesn't become useful anymore, okay? We need to start getting it moving again. So you're going to have to manually try and break down some of that stiffness. And we can do that in a very easy way. So the easy way is to just take the joint nearest to the muscle through its full range of motion, okay? So let's say, for argument's sake, I've pulled my bicep, which is this muscle here at the front of the arm. So if I've pulled my bicep, the joints that are going to be getting stiff are my elbow and my shoulder, okay? So it's the two nearest joints to the muscle, the one above and the one below. So what I'll need to do is I'll need to get my elbow moving again. So after day 3, what I might do is just start to gently take my elbow through range. And I'm not doing this against any resistance. I'm not doing it right up into pain. I'm just gently moving the arm to relieve the stiffness. Now, similar to that, I need to do the same thing for my shoulder. So I might just gently take my shoulder through its full range of motion going this way. I might also take it through its full range of motion going out to the side and up and over. And I might take it through its full range of motion in rotation as well. So this should be a nice, comfortable process. It shouldn't feel sore. The muscle itself might complain a little bit, but this will be really good for getting you moving as quickly as possible. So for the days 3 to 7 after the injury, this is the rehabilitation we start to do. Now, at this stage, you've been using ice up to day 3, but the thing that can help you move a bit better is often heat. So now the bleeding has come down, there's not as much bleeding from the muscle. We don't need to use the ice as much after day 3. So from day 3 onwards, we might start using heat instead. So I could put heat on the tight bicep if I've torn my bicep, and then that will help me to move my arm a bit better. Now, obviously, this advice also applies to your lower leg. If you've pulled your thigh muscle, you would work on extending the knee forward and back. If you've pulled your calf, you would work on moving the ankle forward and back as well. You get the idea. You just have to apply the advice to the muscle in question. So that's the second step, and we do that up to about the first week. And the third step to rehabilitating a pulled muscle is to take this kind of exercise a step further. Now, if we want to regain the use of our muscle, we need to start building strength back up in the affected muscle. And one way we do that is by activating the muscle without asking it to move too much. Now, you might be thinking, well, how on earth do you do that? And the answer is we use a type of exercise called an isometric. Okay, an isometric hold is a very effective way at getting the muscle strong again without aggravating the muscle tear. So let me give you an example. So let's say again that I've pulled this bicep here, okay? And the bicep does this action. It pulls my arm up towards me. So if I want to get the muscle working, if I was to give myself a weight to hold, that would be too much at this stage. It would really hurt my bicep because it's still healing. It's still trying to mesh back together. Unless I use a very light weight, it's going to aggravate it. So after week 1, what we're going to do is, instead of using an external force, we're just going to ask the muscle to contract against something without activating it fully. And that looks something like this. So we put a block against the affected limb and we just ask that muscle there to start to switch on. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to pull my arm up towards me, and my good arm is stopping the movement. And as you can probably see here, this muscle here is just starting to switch on. And I'm not doing 100% effort, I'm just doing 50 or 60%. So I would contract, hold for 5 or 6 seconds, and then relax. And again, contract, hold for 5 or 6 seconds, and then relax. And I would do this with any injured muscle after that first week period. Okay, so typically with my clients, I will get them to do that from week 1 to week 2, just to start to get the muscle activating. Now, isometric exercise is also really good at reducing pain, so that's another benefit, but it's really the first step at returning the strength to the injured muscle. Now, the fourth step to fixing a pulled muscle is to return flexibility to the injured muscle. Now, this stage wouldn't start until about 2 to 3 weeks after the injury, because it's going to involve stretching. Now, a lot of people come to see me after a pulled muscle and they're saying, well, I injured it on Thursday, on Friday I started stretching it and it's still not feeling any better. And the reason it's not feeling better is because they started stretching it too early. If you've torn your muscle, what's trying to happen is the two ends of the tear are trying to mesh back together so the muscle heals. But if you keep stretching it, you're pulling those two ends apart, so it can't heal properly. So every time you stretch it, you're delaying the healing. Now, eventually, after 2 or 3 weeks, the muscle has meshed back together enough, typically, so that it can stay attached. Now, that means that it's safe to start stretching it. And this time will be different for everyone. So typically it's 2 to 3 weeks. You can't take that as advice because that's different for everyone. So make sure you get checked out for your own circumstances. But about 2 to 3 weeks is right for most people. Now, once we've pulled a muscle, the muscle gets very tight for reasons I explained earlier. It's trying to protect itself. So the stretching helps to undo the tightness. You might notice that your muscle that's been pulled still feels very tight. So if you pull your arm and you try and extend the elbow, that might feel tight there. Equally, if you've pulled your calf and you try and stretch your calf, it might feel very tight as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to employ a stretch for the affected muscle. Now, of course, this video is too short for me to be able to go through every stretch in the body, but I have other videos on my channel for each corresponding body part, which should give you a good stretch to relieve the tension. Now, the fifth step to rehabilitating a pulled muscle is to start regaining your full strength. Now, a couple of steps ago, we talked about the isometric strength, and that's great, but we need strength to happen all the way through the movement. So this is when we start to work against a bit of resistance and we start some strengthening. So for example, if I've pulled my bicep, this is when I would start to get a weight and I would take it right through its full range of motion just to see if I can get strength right through it. Again, if you've pulled your quad, you might do something like a squat or a sit to stand type movement. If you've pulled your calf, you might try going up on your heels, like a heel raise. Obviously, there are countless exercises to strengthen, but this is the time when we start to move the muscle right through its full range of motion against resistance. Typically, we would do this after about the 2nd to 3rd week. So this happens about the same time as the flexibility work as well. And I would keep working on strengthening until you find that your right is the same as your left. Now, until you've got your right side matching up with your left side or vice versa, you're not ready to move on to the next stage. And the next stage is getting you back to sport. So our rule of thumb is until you have the same strength on both sides, you should keep working in the gym or at home to build that strength, and then you can start to get back into sport with a much lower risk of re-injury. Now, the 6th and final step to getting you back to full fitness is to start to reintroduce the things you've not been able to do. So if you've pulled your hamstring and you're trying to get back into football, what you would start off doing is a little bit of what we would call field rehab. Now, this would be exactly the same if it's just walking you want to get back to. You need to start doing things that are very similar to the sport you're missing out on. So what we would usually tell people to do is to reintroduce the activity just at a 50% effort to begin with. So if you're a footballer and you're trying to get back to playing after an injured hamstring, we would just start you running at 50% and maybe kicking a ball just over short distances just to see how that feels. If that feels okay, we can start to increase it by 10% each time. Now, that is just as relevant for gardening or walking. So if you're a gardener and you usually spend 2 hours out in the garden at a time, to get you back into it, you might start with just half an hour or 1 hour of light gardening just to see how you feel. If that feels totally fine, next time you go out, increase it by 10%. And you keep increasing it by 10% for 5 times until you're back to 100%. That's a gross simplification, but that is one of the best protocols you can take yourself through at home to get you back into a given activity if you're just doing it on a casual basis. If you're more of a serious exerciser, you might need to get some professional advice for how you get back into your chosen sport or hobby. Anyway, those are the 6 steps to get a pulled muscle better. I hope that's all made sense. If it has, please leave me a comment below as well as any questions you might have. And if you haven't already, please do pick up a copy of my book. It's called Thriving Beyond 50 and it will give you a ton more health advice for rehabilitating yourself after an injury like this video. Other than that, that's all I've got to say. So thank you very much for watching and I look forward to speaking to you on the next video.